Ask any badminton fan what was the greatest ever performance by a player, most will likely point to this, the 2008 Olympic final. And that's for good reason, as Lin Dan didn't just win the Olympic gold in front of his home crowd, but he destroyed the world number 2 and his eternal rival Lee Chong Wei in the process, with a performance that can only be best described as a tidal wave of speed and power. In fact, this performance was so good that most people deem it as the best of not just Lin Dan, but men's singles as a whole. But is it? As there are those that feel Lin Dan didn't reach his peak until a few years later. So, which one is it? Well, that's what I'm going to look into in this video. But before we get to that, I feel it's important to say that what I'm not going to do is compare 2008 Lin Dan to any other player from any other era. Let me bring up that Google quote again. What I'm not entertaining is that version could beat any player from any era. That's because honestly it's a difficult question to answer, and also it is a question that I feel could lead to a lot of going round in circles. But the question I feel that could be better answered, and one that I feel is more interesting, is whether or not that 2008 Olympic final Lin Dan was the best version of Lin Dan. So without further ado, let's get to it. I think an obvious place to start is to lay out why so many people regard Lin Dan's 2008 Olympic performance as the greatest ever in the first place, which for ease of reference moving forward I will always refer to as 2008 Lin Dan. The most glaring one to me is that the performance was pretty damn flawless. I'm not going to give away my conclusion in the first 30 seconds, but put it this way, if I had to give you a top 5 Lin Dan performances, or badminton performances for that matter, then I'd definitely include the 2008 Olympic final within it. But a little deeper than that, I feel there are 8 main reasons as to why 2008 Lin Dan is held in such high regard. Reason number 1, Lin Dan said so. Well, this might end the video before it even begins, but worry not, as I am being a little ambiguous. Because whilst Lin Dan did say, and I quote, "It was just the best match of my entire career, of my whole life," he said this in a post-match interview after that 2008 Olympic final. Lin Dan did also say, in his autobiography titled Until the End of the World, released in 2012, that he was never more ready for a match than that 2008 Olympic final. But maybe if you ask Lin Dan today, he might say something different. Plus, just because Lin Dan felt he was never more ready, doesn't mean that he was at his absolute best in terms of badminton level. Reason number 2, the scoreline. Lin Dan won that Olympic final 21-12, 21-8, which, let's be honest, even if you don't know much about badminton, can clearly see that it was a very easy win. So easy in fact that surely it must be the best ever Lin Dan. Reason number 3, who his opponent was. In that final, Lin Dan faced Lee Chong Wei. At the time, Lee Chong Wei was the world number 2 and seeded 2nd at the tournament. This meant that not only did Lin Dan win with a very comfortable scoreline, but he did so against the next best player in the world. It's kind of like if Roger Federer beat Rafa Nadal something like 6-2, 6-1, 6-1 in a Grand Slam final. And to kind of follow on from that tennis analogy, to give this reason even more weight, just like Rafa was to Roger, Lee Chong Wei was Lin Dan's greatest rivalry, with their rivalry also being the greatest of all time. Now that more time has passed and that rivalry has been truly cemented, it adds even more weight to this 2008 Olympic final performance. Reason 4, it was the Olympics. The Olympics is the pinnacle of almost all sports. It certainly is in badminton. The pressure on players to deliver at this once every 4 years event is crazy. So for Lin Dan to deliver this sort of performance at such a huge event makes it stand out even more. Reason 5, it was a home Olympics. If it being an Olympics wasn't enough, these games were held in Beijing. So the pressure and expectation for Lin Dan to deliver was increased tenfold, which in turn makes what Lin Dan did even more memorable and stand out even more. Reason 6, redemption story. Just one more thing to add to the whole "it was a home Olympics" was that Lin Dan had a lot to prove, as at the previous Olympics he was the number 1 seed and yet crashed in the very first round to Ronald Susilo. This was such a shock at the time that even Taoufik Hidiat, the player who went on to win in Athens, remarked about it in an interview he gave after winning gold. So yeah, the fact this 2008 Olympic gold was off the back of such heartache before, I feel gives what Lin Dan did in 08 so much more weight, and just like all the reasons so far, has only been compounded as more years have gone by. Reason 7, his form throughout those Olympics. It wasn't just the final where Lin Dan performed at an incredibly high level. He did so in every single round. En route to winning gold, he didn't drop a single game. In fact, he never looked in danger of doing so, dominating every opponent he played. There is very good reason to call it the most dominant Olympic win in all of badminton. But why is that a reason, I hear you ask? Well, I feel the fact he played brilliantly all the way through gives the Lin Dan was at his best in 2008 even more weight, because you can't point to any part where he faltered. The final was like a very big cherry on top. And finally, reason 8, the style that Lin Dan used. Throughout those Olympics, and especially in the final, Lin Dan played extremely aggressively. The leaping jump smashes with follow-ups were numerous. To put it bluntly, watching Lin Dan in those 2008 games was incredibly exciting. And even though this match took place 16 years ago, to those that saw it then, like me, it still seems so vivid today. There aren't many badminton performances that have stood out more, and because of that, he's been put on a pedestal and deemed Lin Dan at his best. So those are my 8 reasons as to why I feel most people say that this 2008 Lin Dan is Lin Dan at his best. They are certainly the reasons I have given when talking to people about this subject, as until making this video, whenever anyone asks me what do you think is the best Lin Dan, I always cited those 2008 Olympics. But upon reflection, I feel I could argue against some of those, as well as add a few other arguments that could go against this, which is what I'll do now. Okay, I'm just going to jump right in. Let's start with the scoreline. There's no doubting that Olympic final was incredibly one-sided, but I feel there are a few things that need to be taken into consideration. Firstly, Lee Chong Wei was far from his best in that final. He was very much overawed by the situation, not helped by having 5,000 Chinese supporters firmly against him. On top of this, he was likely mentally and physically exhausted from his semi-final win over Lee Chong, which was a titanic battle. Now, I'm not trying to make excuses for Lee Chong Wei, nor in any way am I trying to belittle Lin Dan's performance. But instead, I'm just trying to offer up a little bit of context, which I feel is necessary to answer the question at hand. Whether you agree or not, at the very least, it certainly makes the scoreline argument seem a little weaker. This leads me nicely onto the second counter argument. Lee Chong Wei made vast improvements over the coming years. Following those 2008 Olympics, Lee Chong Wei improved massively. I feel he improved far more, comparatively, than any other player on the circuit, including Lin Dan. By 2011 to 2012, Lee Chong Wei was at his absolute best. He was a perfect combination of attack, defence, consistency and speed. And this was backed up with him being the world #1 and quickly racking up more titles than anyone else. Again, that includes Lin Dan. Yet, despite all of that, Lin Dan still beat Lee Chong Wei the majority of the time. Lin Dan definitely beat him when it truly mattered.
Lin Dan. 4 times world champion.
Lin Dan has done it again.
Had Lin Dan not improved from 2008, I think it's fair to say this likely wouldn't have been the case. Now, some still could argue that 2008 Lin Dan would have still won those matches, but I'm not entirely sure. I think this is still a solid point to make, giving a strong argument towards the fact that a later version of Lin Dan was better than 2008 Lin Dan. Now let's look at the Olympic reasons. In the arguments for, I gave a number of reasons that were linked to the fact the 2008 performance happened at the Olympics. It being the Olympics itself, the fact it was on home soil, and the redemption from the previous Olympics. It did create a melting pot for looking back at the 2008 Lin Dan overtly fondly. As a result, a counter to this could be that had Lin Dan delivered the same kind of performance against the same player, but at a lower tournament, would it be held in the same regard today? I'm sure it would still be talked about, I'm sure there would still be people claiming it to be the best Lin Dan ever, but I'm confident it wouldn't be as popular an opinion. Like I said, the Olympic factor certainly gave the whole performance, and therefore argument towards this being the best Lin Dan, far more weight. But to show this even more clearly, let me give you an example. Following those Olympics, the next time Lin Dan and Lee Chong Wei faced was in the final of the China Open. Now, the China Open is one of the biggest events on the calendar. It is one of the 4 tournaments that make up the Super 1000 events today. In that final, Lin Dan defeated Lee Chong Wei in a very comprehensive manner, 21-18, 21-9. Now, that is a little closer than the Olympic final, and the first game was titled away, but still Lin Dan dominated the match. In fact, this was one of the next heaviest defeats for Lee Chong Wei against Lin Dan after the 2008 Olympics. Lin Dan dominated the match, showcasing a similar style to the 2008 Olympics. Yet, no one really talks about this match. In fact, before doing this video, I didn't recall this final at all. So yeah, with this in mind, maybe we do look at the 2008 Olympics too fondly, because it was the Olympics. Now let's talk about the style of Lin Dan. 2008 Lin Dan was certainly entertaining to watch, incredibly aggressive with jump smashes and kills all over the court. Lin Dan covered the court faster than I've seen anyone ever. In fact, I will say that Lin Dan was never that fast again. But there is an explanation for this. In the years following those Olympics, Lin Dan looked to develop his game. He matured in his style, developing all of his weaknesses, and became a far more rounded player. It's not that he didn't display the kinds of things we saw in 2008, it's just that he was more measured with it all, opting to pick his moments more wisely. Something he likely knew he had to do if he wished to have a long-lasting career. In short, Lin Dan evolved as a player. Why that is an argument against 2008 Lin Dan being the best Lin Dan is that the majority of people will generally associate the very aggressive, very fast, very attacking style with being better. They'll see that 2008 performance and be blown away by the visual of it. So fast, so aggressive, so attacking, and therefore naturally believe it is him at his best. Then they might watch Lin Dan in the coming years, playing what visually seems a slower and more passive style, and think Lin Dan wasn't able to play like before because he had already peaked, when instead Lin Dan had simply made a conscious decision to develop every area of his game, something which did make him less aggressive, but something which allowed him to have far more options to win matches. Basically what I'm trying to say here is that the 2008 Lin Dan visually looked far more impressive than the Lin Dan from later years, and as a result, most people associated 2008 Lin Dan with being the best Lin Dan. So those are the arguments for and against 2008 Lin Dan being the best Lin Dan. And whilst you may have a few other reasons to add, I think you're all dying to know one thing. What do I think? Well, I'll just come out and say it. I don't think 2008 Lin Dan is the best Lin Dan, but I do think his 2000 Olympic final is his best ever performance. Wait, what? How does that work, I hear you say? Well, let me explain, because I do feel it is possible to have your best ever performance not actually equate with that being the best version of yourself. There is no doubt in my mind that Lin Dan's 2008 Olympic final performance was pretty much perfect. Yes, Lee Chong Wei was overawed by the situation and not at his best, but I feel a big part of why that was Lin Dan's play and the kind of presence he put on the match. Not only that, but throughout the whole of those Beijing Games, he was pretty much flawless. However, as perfect a performance as it was, I do feel that Lin Dan became a far better player over the next 4 years, as he progressed towards the next Olympics in London, where he made history and defended his Olympic crown. Within that Olympic cycle, Lin Dan matured as a player. He wasn't as aggressive or as overly attacking as before, but he did become far more astute, far more tactically proficient, and I also feel he improved his overall technique, especially his front court, all the while still maintaining a crazy level of speed. The thing is though, I don't think I can give you an exact tournament or match that can emphasise this. There are a few where he played sublime, most of those coming at the biggest events. Maybe it's this that on reflection is the main reason as to why so many people look at the 2008 Lin Dan as the best version of Lin Dan, the version which even Google believes could defeat any player from any era. And that's because you can actually cite an example. But to me anyway, the fact I can't cite an example doesn't really matter, as between the 2008 Olympics and the 2012 Olympics, there's no doubt to me that Lin Dan kept getting better and better. It's why, aside from the 2010 World Championships, Lin Dan won every major going. And it's why that even as his biggest rival Lee Chong Wei became the undisputed world number 1 and king of the Super Series, when it really mattered, Lin Dan would still come out on top. So let me end this video by confirming my stance. I believe the 2008 Olympic final was Lin Dan's greatest ever performance, but I feel the player he became by the next Olympics in London was far more complete, and therefore 2008 Lin Dan was not the best Lin Dan.